Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle episode from the Sleepy Historian, a corner of the internet where boring history for sleep becomes a quiet companion to your evening rest. Here, the pace is always slow, the tone always soft, and the stories always measured, told not to stir excitement, but to help you ease into stillness. This is calm bedtime storytelling, a soft-spoken history documentary designed for those moments when you wish to drift into sleep with a little company from the past. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And perhaps let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time of night it is. There is something strangely comforting in knowing that scattered across the world, others too are falling asleep to the same old stories. We may be separated by oceans, but united by the rhythm of shared history and the quiet wish for rest. So dim the lights. Set aside the noise of your day. Allow your mind to soften, to relax, to gently untangle. Together, we will wander into a world long gone. A place of bustling marketplaces, curious trades, and the simple rhythm of lives lived more than 2,000 years ago. Tonight's journey is titled, "You Won't Believe What They Sold in Ancient Athens." Fans of Roman history, archaeology, and calm narration may find themselves at home here, though our story takes us slightly eastward into the heart of classical Greece. The city of Athens, famed for philosophy and democracy, was also home to a lively marketplace, the Agora, where citizens bought and sold the most ordinary and sometimes the most unexpected goods. In this video, we will gently unfold 4 long chapters of Athenian life. Each will follow a steady rhythm, and you may listen to all or drift away midway. The story will not demand anything from you. First, we will immerse ourselves in daily life. The sound of footsteps on worn stone, the smell of fresh bread from the baker's stall, the chatter of vendors advertising their wares. Then, we will follow a figure, perhaps an ancient merchant or philosopher, whose life reveals the intertwining of commerce and culture. Our third chapter will meander into the world of archaeology and mystery, exploring curious discoveries of items once sold, whose meaning is still debated. And finally, we will step into the lives of the wealthy, the elite, and those whose experience of Athens contrasted with the everyday struggle of common folk. There will be no rush, no sharp turns, only smooth transitions from one thought to the next. Like walking through shaded colonnades or along quiet pathways, your mind will have space to wander, to imagine, or to simply let go. So, settle in. Let the voices of the past drift through you, light as the whisper of a breeze. This is boring history for sleep, a soft companion for your evening. And so, let us begin. Imagine yourself stepping into the heart of Athens, sometime in the 5th century BCE. The sun is already high, warming the stone pavements, and the city hums with a steady rhythm of footsteps, voices, and the muted clatter of commerce. This place, the Agora, is the true center of Athenian life. Not just a market, but also a civic stage, a social gathering point, and a reminder of how much the daily business of living shaped the destiny of a city renowned for its lofty ideals. The first thing you notice is the scale. The Agora stretches wide, framed by long colonnades, shaded porticos, and temples whose columns rise against the sky. Yet, for all its grandeur, the marketplace itself is filled with simple things. Wooden stalls, clay jars, baskets overflowing with produce. It is not silent majesty, but ordinary activity that gives the Agora its life. The sound is constant but not overwhelming, a low, continuous murmur. Vendors call out the freshness of their goods. Buyers haggle gently over prices. Sandals scrape against worn stones. There is no rush, only rhythm. Everywhere, the senses are engaged. The smell of baked bread lingers from the baker's stalls. Loaves, golden encrusted, sit stacked in woven baskets. Beside them, pots of honey glisten amber in the morning sun. The scent is joined by the sharp tang of olives, dark and wrinkled, piled high, waiting to be scooped into jars. Fishmongers display their catch from the nearby coast, their stalls shaded to preserve freshness. The sea's faint aroma mingles with that of herbs, oregano, thyme, and mint, bundled together with simple string. You wander further. The stalls change. Now you see pottery in every shape and size. Great amphorae for storing wine and oil, small delicate cups painted with scenes of gods and heroes. Some pieces are plain, meant only for function. Others are intricate, the pride of an artisan who spent days at the wheel, careful hands guiding clay into form. Their surfaces are smooth to the touch, cool beneath the fingertips, their weight reassuring. Not everything here is food or craft. The Agora sells the unexpected too. You pass a stall where writing tablets are laid out, simple wooden frames filled with wax, waiting for a stylist to carve letters into their surface. A student might buy one here, practicing his alphabet in the shade of a stoic colonnade. A philosopher might carry one under his arm, scribbling notes during a debate. Nearby, sellers offer incense, perfumes, and even amulets thought to bring protection. For some, commerce is not only about the body's needs, but also about unseen forces, the fragile balance between luck and misfortune. Animals too move through the scene. A farmer has brought a small herd of goats, their bells tinkling softly. Chickens scratch in the dust, tethered loosely near a stall that offers grain. The sounds of their clucking and bleating are familiar, almost comforting, part of the everyday chorus of life. What is striking is the mixture of the ordinary with the extraordinary. This is Athens, home to some of history's greatest minds, yet equally a place where one might pause to choose the ripest figs or argue over the price of olive oil. The Agora does not distinguish between grand ideas and humble necessities. Both share the same space. Here, a statesman may walk past a farmer. A poet may stop to purchase sandals from a leatherworker. A philosopher might debate beneath the same colonnade where a woman sells woven cloth. The blending of lives is seamless. Consider the rhythm of such a day. The marketplace begins early. Farmers from surrounding villages rise before dawn, leading carts of produce along dusty roads. By morning, they're already set up in their places. The city dwellers arrive slowly, some in groups, others alone. Friends meet here, exchanging greetings before turning to their business. Children tug at their parents' tunics, eyes wandering to toys or sweets. Even slaves, sent on errands, weave through the crowd, carrying baskets or amphorae on their shoulders. The Agora reflects the whole of Athenian society, layered but visible, every role apparent in the tasks at hand. Pause for a moment and imagine yourself standing still amidst it all. The voices blur into a soothing hum. The shuffle of sandals becomes a gentle rhythm, and the scents, bread, herbs, oil, blend into an atmosphere that is neither harsh nor overwhelming, but constant and grounding. It is easy to see why Athenians love this place. It was not only where they bought what they needed, it was where life itself unfolded quietly, steadily, with little fanfare, but with great meaning. And in this steady pulse of buying and selling, in the soft clatter of daily trade, lies a truth. History is not always made in great battles or in marble halls. Sometimes it is made in marketplaces, in the quiet decision of what to grow, what to sell, and what to buy. These choices shaped the diets, the homes, and even the ideas of those who lived in this city, echoes of which still reach us thousands of years later. As we leave this first glimpse of the Athenian marketplace, remember that what may appear ordinary, bread, oil, fish, clay, was the foundation of a civilization that gave the world philosophy, drama, mathematics, and democracy. And yet, those lofty contributions were grounded in daily transactions, in stalls of ordinary goods under the Attic sun. When we think of Athens, our minds often drift toward marble temples, gleaming statues, or grand assemblies where citizens debated the future of their city. Yet behind all of that splendor lay quieter, humbler work. the labor of craftsmen whose trades filled both the Agora and the small workshops that lined its edges. Without their skill, Athens would have had neither the tools of daily life nor the symbols of culture that we still admire today. Imagine turning away from the food stalls and stepping into a row of shaded shops. Here, the air is different, less fragrant with herbs and bread, more pungent with the sharp scent of leather, wood shavings, and heated bronze. The rhythm is no longer just voices, but the tapping of hammers, the scraping of knives, the rasp of saws across planks. Each sound is steady, methodical, the kind of repetition that builds not only objects, but also the comforting background of a city at work. The potter's workshop is perhaps the most iconic. Picture him seated at his wheel, foot pressing the treadle, hands wet with clay. The wheel spins, slowly at first, then faster, and a shapeless lump begins to rise, guided by practiced fingers. The walls of the vessel grow taller, thinner, until the form is set. Later, it will be painted, perhaps with black figure designs, scenes of gods, athletes, or myths, or perhaps left plain, destined only to hold grain or oil in some household storeroom. For every masterpiece we admire in museums today, hundreds of simple jars once filled these stalls. The balance between art and utility was constant. Beside the potter works the metalsmith. His trade fills the Agora with glimmers of bronze and iron. Small knives, sturdy nails, buckles, and hinges are laid out for customers to choose from. He shapes each piece at his forge, the glow of fire reflected on his tools. The sound of hammer on metal is rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, steady, inevitable. Some buyers come for farming tools, others for cooking implements, and a few for more ornamental items, jewelry or small decorative plaques. The metalworker's world is both practical and beautiful. Leatherworkers, too, ply their craft. Their stalls are filled with sandals, belts, and straps, each cut and stitched by hand. The scent of tanned hides lingers in the air, sharp yet earthy. A good pair of sandals might last through long walks across the dusty roads that connect the city to its countryside. For soldiers, the leatherworker provides straps for shields, linings for helmets, or harnesses for horses. In every case, the material is shaped with patience, its durability a quiet promise. There are also woodworkers, often less visible, yet essential. Their benches are covered in shavings, curls of pale wood scattered across the floor. From their hands come furniture, carts, handles for tools, and small domestic objects. Each plank is smooth, each joint carefully fitted. Though the Agora bustles with commerce, the craftsman's shop holds a slower rhythm. The quiet satisfaction of shaping raw material into form. The knowledge that each finished piece will find its way into another person's life. We must not forget the weavers and dyers, whose labor brings color into the scene. At their stalls, bolts of fabric are displayed, dyed in hues both soft and striking. The most prized cloth might be tinted deep purple, a color of wealth and status, while more common fabrics come in earthy tones, brown, beige, muted green. Women of Athens, and sometimes men, spend long hours at the loom, their rhythmic shuttle weaving threads into patterns that are simple yet enduring. Clothing is not just necessity, but identity, and each piece carries the quiet story of the hands that made it. The craftsman's world is one of continuity. Techniques are passed down from generation to generation, each master teaching apprentices who watch, practice, and slowly take on greater tasks. In this way, the skills of pottery, metalwork, leather, and weaving remain alive. For the craftsman, there is pride not only in the product, but also in the process itself. The steady repetition, the transformation of raw substance into useful form. What is striking, when you pause to consider, is how much these trades shaped the character of Athens. The philosophers may have spoken of ideals, but they carried their words in clay cups and wrote them down on wax tablets. The generals may have led armies, but their men marched in sandals cut by leatherworkers and held weapons forged in fire by smiths. The elegance of the city's public spaces depended on wood, stone, and metal shaped by unseen hands. If you stand quietly among these workshops, listening to the blend of sounds, the scrape of a chisel, the swish of a loom, the crackle of fire, you hear the true rhythm of daily Athens. It is not lofty speeches or dramatic performances that sustain the city, but these humble crafts, repeated day after day, steady as the passing of time itself. As your imagination lingers here, notice how ordinary and extraordinary mingle. A simple clay jar may hold wine poured at a grand symposium. A plain wooden bench may support a philosopher as he contemplates questions of the cosmos. The thread of daily work connects the grandeur of culture to the reality of human hands. In that connection lies the quiet dignity of the craftsman's world, uncelebrated but essential. To walk through Athens without noticing its food would be impossible. The Agora was not only a place of trade, but also a space where appetites were met and satisfied, where the rhythms of meals structured the days of ordinary Athenians. And though some foods may seem familiar to us today, others belong firmly to their time, carrying within the texture of an ancient diet. Bread was the cornerstone. It was not merely a meal, but the foundation of nearly every table. Bakers began their work long before dawn, grinding grain into flour, kneading dough with practiced movements, and tending their ovens until the city awoke to the scent of warm loaves. Some breads were coarse, made of barley flour, darker and heavier. Others, prepared from wheat, were lighter and more refined, favored by those who could afford the cost. Bread was eaten plain, dipped into oil, or used to scoop other foods. It was so central that to be without bread was to feel hunger itself. Olive oil followed closely behind. More than just a cooking ingredient, it was woven into nearly every aspect of life. It flavored dishes, preserved foods, and even served as fuel for lamps. Its golden sheen filled amphories stacked in storerooms, carried from farms into the city. To taste it was to taste the essence of the Greek countryside, the product of groves that dotted the hills. Combined with bread, it formed the simplest of meals, humble yet nourishing. Cheese, too, was common, often goat's or sheep's milk pressed into firm, salty blocks. It could be eaten fresh, crumbled over bread, or used in stews. In modest homes, a small portion stretched to feed many. Alongside it came legumes, lentils, chickpeas, and beans boiled into thick soups, flavored with herbs, sometimes enriched with a drizzle of oil. Such meals were filling, steady, and modest, reflecting the balance between necessity and resource. Fish, drawn from the nearby seas, added variety. In stalls shaded from the sun, merchants displayed their catch: small sardines, larger tuna, or octopus when the waters allowed. The smell of the sea clung to these places, softened by herbs laid out alongside. Meat, in contrast, was rarer, reserved more for festivals or sacrifices than for daily tables. A roasted joint might appear at a feast, but for most, it was the stew of lentils or the loaf of bread that marked the pattern of everyday nourishment. Wine completed the picture. It was never drunk neat, but always diluted with water, creating a drink that refreshed without overwhelming. Stored in clay amphorae, poured into simple cups, it accompanied meals both humble and grand. Its taste varied from region to region, sometimes sharp, sometimes mellow, but always familiar. In the symposium, it became a companion to talk and song. In the household, it was a daily staple, another thread woven through life. In the Agora, these foods mingled as they were sold. Farmers spread figs, grapes, and apples across their stalls, their sweetness a treat at the end of a meal. Honey, gathered from hives in the countryside, was sold in jars, golden and glistening. Street vendors offered small prepared foods: hot chickpea cakes fried in oil, or skewers of fish cooked over coals. Their scents drifted through the air, tempting even those simply passing by. What is most striking is how these foods reflect both scarcity and abundance. The diet was not extravagant, yet it was varied enough to sustain. Every ingredient tells of a connection to land and sea, of labor in groves, fields, and waters. Each meal tied Athenians to their countryside, even when eaten in the city's crowded heart. The rhythm of food was also the rhythm of life. Morning bread, midday stews, evening wine. Nothing hurried, nothing lavish, only steady repetition. And yet, meals carried meaning beyond sustenance. To share bread and wine was to affirm community. To gather at a table, however modest, was to find comfort in company. Even the poorest shared when they could, breaking bread with neighbors, exchanging olives or figs. Eating was never only about hunger, but also about belonging. Close your eyes and picture it. A family seated on low stools around a simple wooden table. The lamp burns low, fueled with oil pressed from olives gathered months before. On the table sits bread, coarse but warm, a bowl of lentil stew, a small dish of cheese, perhaps a few figs for sweetness. Cups of watered wine stand ready. Voices are quiet, laughter occasional, and the rhythm of the day winds down in this small, steady ritual. It is not a feast nor a celebration, but the ordinary heartbeat of life, repeated night after night. When philosophers spoke of moderation, they spoke in a language of such meals. When poets praised the bounty of the earth, they praised bread, oil, and wine. And when Athenians thought of home, it was likely these flavors, these simple textures, that came to mind. The Agora may have been filled with grandeur, but it was these daily foods, sold in baskets, jars, and clay bowls, that truly sustained the city. Thus, the rhythm of eating was more than necessity. It was culture, identity, and continuity. From farmer to vendor, from mother to child, from city to countryside, food created bonds. And in the steady hum of the Agora, amid the stalls and voices, these connections were visible, ordinary, and essential. The marketplace of Athens was filled with countless figures: farmers, craftsmen, philosophers, and slaves. But among them, one type of person carried a role both ordinary and remarkable: the merchant. These were men, and sometimes women, who made their living not by producing goods, but by carrying them from one place to another. They connected the countryside to the city, and even more importantly, Athens to the wider Mediterranean world. Imagine one such figure, a middle-aged merchant named Damon, a name not uncommon, yet fitting for our purposes. He is neither wealthy nor poor, but situated in that middle ground that gave him both opportunity and challenge. Each day begins before dawn. Damon rises in a modest home, eats a simple breakfast of bread dipped in oil, and gathers his records. Small wax tablets inscribed with notes of accounts, deliveries, and debts. He knows the path to the Agora as well as he knows the lines of his own hand, for it is the stage upon which his life unfolds. His wares vary by season and circumstance. Sometimes he deals in grain, purchased from farmers or imported from lands across the Aegean. At other times, he specializes in olive oil, wine, or salted fish. He has contacts with ship captains who bring goods into Piraeus, the bustling port of Athens, and with villagers who trudge into the city carrying baskets on their backs. Damon's role is to bridge these worlds, to buy at one end and sell at another, to ensure that the flow of goods never ceases. Without him, and others like him, the Agora would lose much of its abundance. Picture him in the thick of trade. He stands beside a stall, amphorae stacked neatly, their pointed bases nestled in sand so they do not tip. He speaks with a farmer, weighing olives with practiced care. He nods at a fellow merchant, acknowledging a shared struggle. His eyes shift constantly, alert to opportunity, wary of risk. The marketplace is calm to the casual visitor, but for Damon it is a web of balances between scarcity and demand, profit and loss, trust and deception. What makes his life compelling is not only the trade itself, but the rhythm it imposes. His weeks are shaped by arrivals and departures of ships, by the turning of seasons that govern harvests. When the winds favor sailing, he must act quickly to secure goods. When storms keep ships in harbor, he endures delay, juggling promises to buyers and pleas to suppliers. His life is a reminder that even in antiquity, commerce was never static. It pulsed with uncertainty, requiring patience, resilience, and foresight. Consider, too, the challenges he faces. Merchants were sometimes distrusted in Athens. Farmers and craftsmen were respected for producing tangible goods, but traders were seen as middlemen, profiting from the labor of others. Philosophers debated whether such a life was virtuous. Yet at the same time, the city could not thrive without them. Damon lives in this contradiction. Necessary, yet not always admired. His reputation rests on fairness, on honesty in weights and measures, on his ability to honor debts. A single failure might undo years of careful work. The social fabric of his life is equally telling. He employs a few assistants, perhaps freedmen or slaves, who carry loads, guard the stall, or run messages. He greets regular customers by name, knowing their preferences, their habits. He exchanges news as much as goods, becoming part of the network that spreads information through the city. Merchants like Damon were not only traders of objects, but also carriers of stories, of rumors, of distant happenings. Through them, the Agora pulsed with knowledge as well as goods. As evening approaches, Damon gathers what remains unsold, records his accounts, and heads home. He is weary but steady. His profit may be small, but it sustains his household. His children will eat, his wife will keep the lamp burning, and tomorrow will bring the same pattern anew. This repetition is his life. Not heroic, not monumental, but vital. For while generals may win battles and philosophers may craft ideas, merchants keep the city fed, clothed, and connected. Pause for a moment and picture this man. Not a statue in marble, not a name inscribed in history, but a living figure whose choices mattered in their own time. In him, you see the ordinary made significant. Through his eyes, the Agora is not only a marketplace, but a lifeline, a thread binding Athens to its own people and to the world beyond its walls. And though Damon himself is imagined, his story reflects countless real lives. Each merchant carried within him the uncertainties of trade, the patience of routine, and the quiet pride of survival. They were not celebrated in epic poetry, but they were remembered in the steady continuation of Athenian life. Their legacy is not in monuments, but in the persistence of daily rhythm, the hum of the market, the turning of seasons, the never-ending flow of goods across land and sea. In this way, the biography of a simple merchant offers us not only a glimpse of one man, but also a mirror of his city. Through him, we sense the pulse of Athens itself, ordinary, steady, yet remarkable in its endurance. If merchants gave Athens its goods, philosophers gave it its reputation. To imagine Athens without philosophy is impossible, for the city became synonymous with the life of the mind. And while many great thinkers left their mark, the Agora was often their stage. It was here, among merchants and farmers, craftsmen and citizens, that philosophy unfolded, not in quiet study alone, but in public spaces filled with the ordinary hum of life. Picture a philosopher named Socrates, though we need not speak of him only in grandeur. He did not wear rich robes or carry signs of office. Instead, he moved through the Agora much like any other man, barefoot at times, clothed simply, his appearance unremarkable to those who did not look closer. Yet his presence was magnetic. He was not a seller of goods, but of questions, and his wares were ideas. The rhythm of his day began with walking. He would move slowly through the colonnades, stopping here and there, engaging those willing to listen, or those who found themselves caught by his sudden inquiries. A potter displaying jars, a soldier buying sandals, a youth idling with friends. Anyone could become his companion in dialogue. His method was not to lecture, but to ask. He peeled away assumptions, gently but persistently, until his partner saw more clearly, or at least more deeply, than before. Around him, the Agora continued its business. Merchants called prices, children played, animals moved. The contrast is striking. Lofty conversations about virtue and justice unfolding beside stalls of fish or bolts of cloth. Yet this mixture was precisely the character of Athens. Ideas and goods, philosophy and trade, interwoven without separation. Philosophy was not confined to classrooms, but lived amidst the dust and chatter of the marketplace. Imagine standing near him for a time. His voice is calm, measured, rarely raised. His questions are simple but unsettling. What is courage, he might ask a soldier, and then follow with, is it the absence of fear or the mastery of it? The soldier shifts uneasily, answers, and finds the question turning back on him, refined, reshaped. Around them, listeners gather, first a few, then more. Some nod thoughtfully, others smile at the familiar spectacle. For this is Athens, a place where ideas are not hidden, but shared in public, where even the humblest bystander may hear and reflect. Socrates himself left no writings. His life, like the Agora itself, was oral, immediate, lived in dialogue. But his influence carried far, through students who remembered his words. In him we see not only an individual, but a practice, philosophy as an act of daily living. He was not a figure isolated from society. Rather, he was woven into it, as present in the market as any trader or craftsman. Other philosophers too walked these spaces. Sophists offered lessons for a fee, teaching rhetoric to ambitious young men who hoped to succeed in politics. Cynics, later, would model lives of austerity, demonstrating that wealth was not necessary for virtue. Each thinker added another voice, another perspective, to the chorus of the Agora. Ideas competed here, just as goods did, and the currency was persuasion rather than coin. Pause and imagine the scene. The shaded walkway, the buzz of commerce, and amidst it all, a circle of listeners leaning in as a philosopher questions them. The light slants across the stones, sandals shuffle, but the mind lingers on the questions, turning them over quietly. Even as you drift in thought, the philosopher continues, never impatient, always steady, his words drawing attention not to himself, but to truth. Such figures remind us that philosophy was not a distant, abstract endeavor, but part of the fabric of the city. The same Agora that sold bread and sandals also offered ideas about justice, love, and the good life. And for those who pause to listen, the effect might last longer than any meal or purchase. When the day ended, the philosopher too returned home. He ate simply, perhaps bread and olives, drank a little wine, and continued his conversations into the evening. His legacy was not in goods sold, but in minds stirred. In him, we see another dimension of Athenian life. Not only the exchange of objects, but the exchange of thoughts, questions, and possibilities. And so, the Agora was both market and classroom, a space where the rhythms of daily necessity met the higher reaches of reflection. This duality is what gave Athens its enduring character, practical yet philosophical, ordinary yet remarkable. Through the life of a philosopher in the Agora, we glimpse a city alive not only with trade, but with thought. In the Agora, ideas flowed freely, but freedom has boundaries, even in Athens. The most famous event that revealed both the promise and the peril of the city's intellectual life was the trial of Socrates. Though it is a moment often remembered with solemnity, here we will explore it calmly, as one episode in the ongoing rhythm of Athenian society, a story that unfolded slowly, like the steps of a man walking across the stones of the Agora. Imagine Athens in the year 399 BCE. The city had endured war, plague, and political turmoil. The The Peloponnesian War had ended in defeat, democracy had faltered, and wounds remained fresh. Amidst this turbulence, Socrates stood out, not for his wealth, not for his power, but for his relentless habit of questioning. He asked citizens to examine themselves, to consider whether their values matched their actions. To some, he was a gadfly prodding the city awake. To others, he was a nuisance, perhaps even a danger. The charges against him were threefold: impiety, corrupting the youth, and introducing new gods. These accusations, though serious, were also vague. What did it mean to corrupt the youth? To ask them to think critically? To speak of the divine differently than tradition allowed? The jury of Athenians, ordinary men chosen by lot, would have to decide. Picture the trial scene. There is no grand courtroom, no towering bench. Instead, the trial unfolded in a civic space, with jurors seated, the accused standing, and speeches delivered aloud. The Agora itself, with its constant presence of citizens and public debate, formed the backdrop to this proceeding. Socrates stood calmly, his voice even, his words deliberate. He did not beg or flatter. He argued, as he always had, through reason. He reminded the jury of his service as a soldier, his loyalty to Athens, his life of simplicity. He explained that he sought truth, not trouble, and that his questioning was not corruption, but a service, like a doctor administering medicine, sometimes bitter, but necessary. He did not deny his way of life. Instead, he defended it, suggesting that to silence him would be to silence the city's conscience. The jury listened. Some nodded, others frowned. In the end, the vote was close, but decisive. Guilty. When the question of punishment arose, Socrates once more surprised his listeners. He suggested, half in jest and half in earnest, that he deserved reward rather than penalty, for he had served the city well. Yet the jury chose death. Even then, Socrates remained calm. He accepted the decision, not with bitterness, but with a sense of inevitability. To him, philosophy was not a shield for mortality, but a preparation for it. His words lingered, that death is either a dreamless sleep or a passage to another place, where one might continue to converse with departed souls. In either case, he reasoned, there was no need to fear. Imagine the scene afterward. Friends gathered with him, offered chances of escape, but he refused. To flee would be to break the laws he had lived under, to undermine the very order he had claimed to serve. And so he stayed, drank the cup prepared for him, and met his end quietly. This event, though tragic, reflects Athens itself, a city proud of free speech, yet capable of silencing one of its greatest voices, a city that celebrated questioning, yet feared its consequences. In the trial of Socrates, we glimpse the contradictions of democracy, the fragility of freedom, and the enduring human struggle to balance individual thought with collective order. For those who remained, the trial left deep impressions. Plato, one of Socrates' students, would preserve his words, shaping them into dialogues that continued the conversations his teacher had begun. Xenophon, too, would write of him, recalling both his wisdom and his everyday simplicity. Through these memories, Socrates lived on, not as a ghost, but as a voice echoing through the centuries, returning again and again to those willing to listen. For us, reflecting on his trial is not to dwell in sorrow, but to see how a single life can reveal the character of a society. In Athens, even death was debated, justified, explained in reasoned words. And the Agora, once filled with his questions, remained a place of voices, new philosophers, new merchants, new citizens, carrying forward the rhythm of life. So, as the sun sets on this part of our story, we see Socrates not as a figure isolated in history, but as part of the fabric of Athens, a man walking its streets, speaking its language, embodying both its greatness and its flaws. His trial reminds us that history is never only about victories or defeats, but about the choices people make, the conversations they hold, and the quiet persistence of ideas. So far, we have walked through the Agora as though it were a stage filled with merchants, philosophers, and citizens at the height of activity. But the Agora was not only a place of noise and life. Beneath its surface and at its edges lay mysteries that archaeology has slowly uncovered. Layers of forgotten structures, discarded objects, and hidden stories that reveal how Athenians lived, worshipped, and remembered their dead. Imagine yourself standing in the Agora not as a bustling market, but as it appears to archaeologists today, a wide, sunlit expanse with low stone outlines, fragments of columns, and the faint traces of walls. Trees provide shade, and birds circle overhead. The silence here is deceptive, for beneath the ground rests centuries of life. Each shard of pottery, each buried foundation, is a whisper from another time. Excavations of the Agora began in earnest in the 20th century, led largely by the American School of Classical Studies. Layer by layer, they removed soil to uncover streets, fountains, shrines, and wells. What they found tells us not only about trade, but about ritual and memory. Beneath later buildings, they discovered wells filled with broken pottery, bronze coins, and discarded offerings. Some wells may have been used for water, but others became repositories of unwanted or ritually significant objects. Archaeologists believe that after moments of crisis, like plague or war, Athenians sometimes disposed of items linked with fear or misfortune, consigning them to the earth. There were shrines too, modest in size, but rich in meaning. One shrine was dedicated to the Mother of the Gods, a figure absorbed into Greek religion from Anatolia. Another honored the 12 gods, standing near the very heart of the Agora. These were not grand temples like the Parthenon, but small sacred spaces woven into daily life. A merchant might pass a shrine on his way to sell figs, pausing briefly for prayer before continuing on. A child might drop a flower there, imitating older relatives. The sacred and the ordinary existed side by side. Imagine walking these corners in antiquity. Between the stalls of potters and bronze workers, you would notice modest altars, sometimes blackened from offerings of incense or small animals. Fragments of clay figurines might lie scattered, remnants of devotion left by ordinary citizens. These details remind us that Athens was not only political and commercial, but spiritual. The Agora was not just a marketplace. It was also a sacred landscape where humans sought contact with the divine. Another mystery revealed by excavation is the presence of graves. Before the Agora became the civic heart of Athens, it was a burial ground. Archaeologists have found graves from the early Iron Age, long before the classical city emerged. This layering of purposes, cemetery, marketplace, civic center, adds to the sense of continuity. Each generation reshaped the space, yet traces of the past remain beneath their feet. As Athenians walked across the Agora in the 5th century BCE, they unknowingly trod upon the resting places of ancestors from centuries earlier. One of the most evocative discoveries is the Bone Well, a pit containing the remains of infants along with broken pottery and small objects. Scholars debate its meaning. Was it a burial place linked to ritual practice, or simply a way of disposing of the bodies of children who died too young for formal burial? The truth may never be fully known. Yet even in such uncertainty, the site speaks of the fragility of ancient life and the ways Athenians grappled with loss. Calmly we acknowledge it, a reminder that the Agora was not only a place of life and conversation, but also a repository of sorrow and memory. Archaeology also uncovers small details of daily existence. Loom weights that hint at weaving, gaming pieces that speak of leisure, and writing tablets that preserve the traces of practice. These are the quiet artifacts of ordinary lives. Unlike the great speeches or monumental statues, they do not proclaim glory. They whisper of afternoons spent spinning wool, evenings passing time with a game, mornings learning letters. In these fragments, Athens feels less like a myth and more like a lived city. Standing in the reconstructed Agora today, you might notice the Stoa of Attalos, rebuilt in the 20th century as a museum. Within its halls are displayed many of these artifacts: pottery with delicate red figure designs, tools worn from use, coins stamped with owls, and inscriptions that record decrees or dedications. Each object is a thread in the fabric of memory, carefully preserved and displayed so that modern visitors can imagine the life once carried out here. The mystery of the Agora, then, is not one of hidden treasure or secret chambers, but of ordinary things made extraordinary by time. A broken cup becomes a voice from antiquity. A worn coin becomes evidence of trade. A child's toy becomes a sign of play across centuries. These objects remind us that history is not only written in battles and decrees, but in the quiet persistence of everyday life. And so, when we think of the Agora, we must remember not only the bustle of its prime, but the silence of its buried past. Beneath the stones lies a palimpsest of lives. Merchants, children, worshippers, mourners, all leaving traces that, centuries later, allow us to listen in silence. When archaeologists dig in the Agora, they do not only uncover buildings and coins. They often find objects that seem odd, puzzling, even mysterious. These items remind us that daily life in Athens held practices that do not always fit neatly into modern categories. Some discoveries resist simple explanation, and in that resistance lies part of their quiet fascination. One category of unusual finds is inscribed ostraca, small shards of pottery scratched with names. At first glance, they look like discarded fragments. Yet these broken pieces were central to the practice of ostracism, a democratic tool by which Athenians could vote to exile a citizen for 10 years. The name of the person targeted was etched onto the shard, then collected in large numbers. If the tally was sufficient, the citizen had to leave the city, though without loss of property or citizenship. Archaeologists have uncovered piles of these ostraca in the Agora, some carrying names like Themistocles or Aristides, figures famous in Athenian history. Holding one today, you can imagine the quiet moment when a hand scratched a name, reflecting fear, resentment, or perhaps just caution. Another curious category of finds are curse tablets, known as depictions. These were thin sheets of lead inscribed with words intended to bind or harm rivals. They were rolled or folded, then deposited in wells or buried in the ground. The curses range from personal disputes to matters of business or love. Imagine a merchant frustrated by a competitor, writing a spell to hinder his rival's trade, or a lover, rejected, asking the gods of the underworld to intervene. The handwriting is often hurried, the words uneven. Though they carry malice, they also reveal the vulnerability of those who made them, seeking help where ordinary means failed. There are also small terracotta figurines, some broken, some intact. These figurines depict animals, dancers, or simple human forms. Were they toys, offerings, or both? It is difficult to say. A child might have played with one until it cracked. Another might have been placed carefully in a shrine. The ambiguity reminds us that objects can serve multiple roles: entertainment, devotion, remembrance. In one well, archaeologists found a cluster of miniature vessels, too small for practical use. These were likely votive offerings, left in honor of deities. Their presence in a discarded context suggests changing religious practices, or perhaps the clearing away of old dedications after a shrine fell out of use. Such finds demonstrate how the Agora was not static, but evolving, shaped by the needs and beliefs of each generation. Imagine yourself as an ancient Athenian encountering these objects not as artifacts in a museum, but in their original context. You pause at a shrine and notice tiny clay, animals left by others. You pass by a well and hear whispers of spells cast into its depths. You attend an assembly where ostraca are distributed, each shard carrying the weight of a citizen's fate. The objects are humble, yet together they shape the rhythm of civic and private life. Among the more unsettling finds are bones showing signs of ritual sacrifice. Archaeologists discovered animal remains carefully arranged, sometimes burned, suggesting offerings to the gods. These discoveries remind us that religion was not abstract. It involved tangible acts, food, fire, blood, and bone, presented to unseen powers. In our retelling, we acknowledge this quietly, without dwelling on gore, noting only that such practices gave Athenians a sense of connection with forces beyond themselves. One of the strangest finds is a collection of inscribed potsherds with the same name, written by what appears to be the same hand. Scholars debate whether these were prepared by individuals trying to sway ostracism by handing out ready-made votes, or by professional scribes hired to write for those who could not. Either way, the discovery reveals both the practical mechanics of democracy and the undercurrents of manipulation within it. These objects, scattered across the Agora, remind us that history is not only about what is monumental. It is also about the quiet, the hidden, and the ambiguous. A cursed tablet is as much a voice from the past as a marble statue. An ostracon speaks as clearly of civic life as a decree carved in stone. A child's figurine carries as much humanity as a general's helmet. In a museum today, these objects are displayed carefully, labeled with scholarly notes. Yet their power lies in their ordinariness. They were not made to last forever. They were made to serve a purpose in a fleeting moment. And still, through chance and soil, they endure, whispering across millennia. When you close your eyes, you might picture not the grand Agora filled with philosophers and speeches, but a quiet corner where someone kneels to drop a tablet into a well or scratches a name into a fragment of clay. These small actions, invisible in the sweep of history, are now the clearest traces we have of real, unrecorded lives. So far, the Agora has appeared as a marketplace, a civic stage, and a place layered with mysterious finds. But it was also a site of festivals, rituals, and public ceremonies, events that punctuated the year and gave rhythm to Athenian life. While temples like the Parthenon on the Acropolis dominate our imagination, the Agora, too, hosted sacred activity, weaving the divine into the very fabric of the city. Imagine standing in the Agora during the Panathenaic festival, the most important celebration in honor of Athena, the city's patron goddess. The procession began outside the walls, wound through the streets, and eventually passed through the Agora before climbing toward the Acropolis. Citizens of every rank took part. Maidens carrying sacred baskets, elders holding olive branches, priests leading animals for sacrifice, musicians playing flutes and lyres. The Agora, usually filled with trade, transformed into a ceremonial path, its stones echoing with the measured tread of participants. The climax of the festival was the presentation of a new woven robe, or peplos, to the statue of Athena. But the procession itself mattered as much as the offering. It allowed Athenians to see themselves as a community united in devotion. The Agora served as their stage, its open expanse filled not with buyers and sellers, but with worshippers and citizens acknowledging the goddess who protected their city. Other rituals took place here too. The altar of the 12 gods, centrally located, was not merely symbolic. It marked the 0 point from which distances in Greece were measured, grounding the city both physically and spiritually. Pilgrims or exiles might seek refuge there, clasping the altar for protection. In this way, the Agora was a place of sanctuary as well as of commerce. Archaeological evidence reveals smaller festivals and rituals as well. Remains of burnt animal bones near altars suggest sacrifices carried out during lesser-known feasts. Terracotta figurines and miniature vessels, found in clusters, hint at private dedications. These rituals did not always involve grand processions. Sometimes they were quiet acts of faith. A mother leaving an offering for her child's health, a craftsman thanking the gods for a successful year. Such gestures filled the Agora with an invisible layer of devotion. The Dionysia, another festival, also left its mark here. While the great theater performances took place elsewhere, the Agora hosted smaller gatherings tied to Dionysus, the god of wine and theater. Songs, laughter, and processions honoring the god would mingle with the daily life of the marketplace. To modern eyes, it may seem unusual to merge sacred ritual with ordinary errands. Yet for Athenians, this blending was natural. Imagine yourself in such a festival. The usual calls of merchants are replaced by music and chants. Altars smoke gently as offerings are made. Citizens pause, not to buy or sell, but to honor their gods. Children watch in wonder, learning the traditions that knit their city together. For a moment, the Agora is less a place of trade and more a theater of devotion, alive with rhythm and color. Even after festivals ended, traces lingered. Ash from sacrifices was swept away, but left marks in the soil. Broken vessels from offerings were buried or discarded, later uncovered by archaeologists. These remnants allow us to sense the continuity between the fleeting moment of ritual and the enduring fabric of history. One particularly evocative practice was the use of boundary stones inscribed with simple phrases, "I am the boundary of the Agora." These stones marked sacred and civic limits, reminding citizens of where certain actions could or could not take place. The act of marking boundaries was itself ritualized, underscoring that space was not neutral but infused with meaning. The Agora was defined not only by walls and stoas, but by invisible lines of sacred and civic order. The blending of sacred and ordinary life in the Agora reflects a broader truth about Athens. Religion was not separate from daily existence. It was not confined to temples or festivals alone. It permeated the streets, the markets, the assemblies. Every act of buying, selling, or debating took place in the shadow of shrines and altars, with the gods as silent witnesses. And so, as we consider the Agora, we see it not merely as a marketplace or civic center, but as a living sacred space, layered with memory, ritual, and devotion. Each festival, each offering, each sacrifice echoed across the stones, leaving subtle traces that endured long after the sounds faded. Today, when we walk its ruins, those echoes are faint but still present, reminders of a city where the divine was woven into every corner of life. Until now, we have mostly imagined the Agora through the eyes of ordinary citizens. Merchants with their wares, philosophers wandering and questioning, worshippers leaving quiet offerings. Yet the Agora also belonged to the wealthy and the powerful, men whose lives contrasted sharply with those of craftsmen and farmers. Here, amidst the same colonnades and stalls, they walked with different purposes, carrying authority not in baskets or jars, but in influence, lineage, and wealth. Imagine, in the late morning, an Athenian statesman entering the Agora. His cloak is of finer wool than most, dyed in deeper hues, its folds carefully arranged. He does not call out to sell, nor does he bargain for small goods. Instead, he is surrounded by companions or petitioners, men who wish to speak with him, to seek favor, or to exchange information. His steps are measured, his gaze surveying the space not for prices but for opportunities. The wealthy elite of Athens often used the Agora as a stage for visibility. To be seen here, moving confidently among citizens, was part of demonstrating status. Unlike the hidden luxury of private homes, which were often modest in outward appearance, the Agora allowed elites to display authority in public. They might commission statues or sponsor festivals, acts known as liturgies. These public benefactions were costly but prestigious, marking the donor as both generous and powerful. One form of liturgy was sponsoring a chorus for dramatic performances. The sponsor, called a choregos, covered the expenses for costumes, training, and musicians. When a chorus performed at festivals, the sponsor's name was announced ensuring recognition. Another form was financing a warship, called a trireme. To fund such a vessel was expensive, but it displayed both wealth and patriotism. In this way, elites turned personal resources into civic honor, and the Agora was one of the places where the results of such contributions were discussed and remembered. Archaeological evidence supports this role of the Agora as a site of commemoration. Inscriptions carved into stone recorded donations, victories, and honors. Bases for statues once lined its spaces, celebrating generals, benefactors, or foreign allies. Though most of the statues are gone, their pedestals remain, quiet witnesses to the constant interplay of wealth and reputation. Consider also the political role of elites. While democracy gave ordinary citizens a voice, influence still rested heavily with those of means. Wealthy Athenians could afford the time to participate fully in politics, to attend the assembly regularly, and to serve as generals or magistrates. Their presence in the Agora was not idle, it was strategic. Here they conversed, negotiated, and gauged the mood of the citizen body. The marketplace of goods was also a marketplace of opinion, where reputations were shaped daily. For contrast, picture an ordinary potter nearby, arranging jars carefully to attract customers. His livelihood depends on steady sales. For the statesman walking past, jars are incidental. What matters is conversation, alliances, the perception of his role in the city. Both share the same space, yet their worlds differ profoundly. One counts coins at the end of the day, the other counts votes and favors. The clothing of the elite, though not ostentatious by modern standards, was still finer than that of the common man. Wool dyed purple or crimson, sandals with intricate straps, cloaks with heavier folds, all subtle markers of status. Slaves often accompanied wealthy men, carrying scrolls, writing tablets, or simply standing ready to fetch goods. Their presence signaled comfort and authority, another layer of distinction in the shared public square. The Agora also hosted trials, political debates, and public announcements that elites often dominated. For them, appearing knowledgeable, persuasive, and visible in these moments was essential. A well-timed speech or a generous donation could sway opinion, earning loyalty that might later decide elections or policies. Yet, despite their wealth, elites could not remove themselves entirely from the common life of the Agora. They too needed to walk its stones, to listen, to be seen. Their prominence made them vulnerable as well. Ostracism, as we discussed earlier, could strike even the most powerful. A name scratched onto a potsherd could send a man into exile, his wealth intact but his influence silenced. The Agora, therefore, was both their stage and their risk. This interplay of power and vulnerability gives the Agora its richness. It was a place where the poor sold fish and the rich financed warships, where a child's toy might lie near a statue's pedestal, where philosophers questioned and politicians maneuvered. For the elite, it was a setting in which to balance generosity with ambition, to cultivate both admiration and caution. And so, when we look at the Agora through their eyes, we see a different layer of Athens. Not only a market, not only a civic hub, but a theater of reputation, where every gesture mattered, and where the contrast between wealth and modesty played out in the open air. When we think of the Agora bustling with debate, trade, and civic duty, the image that often comes to mind is one of men, citizens in cloaks, philosophers with their questions, politicians with their followers. Yet woven quietly into this scene were women, families, and others who did not hold full citizenship, but who still shaped the life of the square. Their presence was more subtle, less recorded, yet no less real. To imagine the Agora fully, we must allow these softer threads of Athenian life to emerge. Athenian women of citizen families lived much of their lives in the domestic sphere, managing households, raising children, and overseeing slaves when the family could afford them. Yet the Agora touched their lives indirectly and directly. They might send slaves to purchase food or materials, or, on certain occasions, come themselves. Religious festivals often drew women into public spaces, and since temples stood within or near the Agora, women could be present for processions, sacrifices, and offerings. In these moments, the square transformed into a stage where the sacred overrode the usual divisions of daily life. Picture, for instance, a mother guiding a young child through the colonnades on the morning of a festival. The stalls of merchants line the path, filled with produce, trinkets, and fabrics. She pauses at a stand selling wreaths, selecting greenery for the procession. Though her time in the Agora may be brief, her presence is part of the fabric of its activity, an interweaving of domestic duty, religious devotion, and civic rhythm. For women of lower status, visibility in the Agora could be more frequent. Sellers of small goods, garlands, cakes, herbs, might be women, often widows or the poor, who use trade to sustain themselves. The image is humbler than that of wealthy statesmen, but no less important. A woman arranging small bundles of herbs on a mat, calling softly to passers-by. Her work anchors her in the public square, her livelihood depending on the slow flow of customers. Children, too, shape the atmosphere. Imagine the sound of young voices darting through the colonnades, carrying errands for parents, or simply running at the edges of the square. Archaeological finds, small toys, knuckle bones, and miniature vessels remind us that the Agora was not solely a place of solemn politics or trade, but also one where the laughter and mischief of the young left quiet traces. For them, the marketplace could be both playground and classroom, a space where they observed adult roles and mimicked them in games. The role of medics, resident foreigners, adds another layer. Though they could not vote or own land, medics contributed heavily to Athenian trade. Many operated workshops or stalls in the Agora, offering goods from abroad. Women among them might manage such enterprises, particularly if widowed or unmarried. These figures complicate the picture of exclusion. While formally outside the political circle of citizenship, their daily presence and economic contribution ensured they were deeply part of the city's rhythm. Slaves, too, were present everywhere, though often overlooked. They carried purchases, set up stalls, and moved quietly in service of their masters. Some were skilled, working as scribes or assistants. Others were tasked with more physical labor. Their voices are largely absent in the written record, yet their footprints filled the Agora as surely as those of philosophers and generals. In moments of imagination, we might see them standing in the shade of a colonnade, waiting patiently, unnoticed yet indispensable. The contrast between visibility and invisibility is striking. Elite men sought the spotlight of the Agora. Women, children, medics, and slaves moved along its edges, woven into its life, but rarely recorded in its chronicles. Yet without them, the Agora would feel oddly hollow, stripped of its full humanity. The square was not just a political stage, but also a lived space where errands were run, food was bought, children laughed, and families navigated their needs. Religious rituals especially blurred these boundaries. On festival days, the Agora thrummed with a broader cross-section of society. Processions wound through the square, altars smoked with offerings, and women walked alongside men, bearing baskets, singing hymns, or leading animals for sacrifice. These were moments when the civic and the sacred intertwined, when divisions softened, and the Agora became a theater of collective identity. Even in quieter times, traces of family life appeared. An inscription might record a dedication from a mother to a god. A small votive object might be left at a shrine, or a child's discarded toy might rest in the soil. Archaeology, in this way, restores some of what written sources overlook, reminding us that the Agora was not simply the domain of the powerful. To imagine the Agora only through the eyes of statesmen would be to miss its heartbeat. Women sending slaves with baskets, children laughing at play, medics selling wares from distant lands, slaves moving in quiet efficiency. All these created the texture of the square. Their roles may have been less celebrated, their voices less recorded, but they carried the rhythm of daily life in ways just as essential as the speeches of orators. And so, in the Agora, visibility was uneven, but presence was shared. The powerful might leave inscriptions carved in stone, but the humble left impressions in soil, in memory, and in the flow of daily activity. Together, they created the living fabric of Athens, a fabric still faintly visible in the stones that remain today. As we near the end of our walk through the Athenian Agora, it is worth pausing to notice those who lived on the edges of respectability, who stood neither fully honored like statesmen nor quietly domestic like housewives, but who nonetheless filled the square with color, sound, and contrast. To understand the Agora as a whole, we must widen our gaze to include these figures: outsiders, entertainers, itinerant performers, and a marginal yet enduring presence of those who live by their wits. One such group were itinerant craftsmen and traders from beyond Athens. While medics had permanent residence, there were also foreigners passing through, sailors bringing goods from the islands, merchants selling spices, dyes, or unusual wares. Their accents, clothing, and manners set them apart. Imagine a stall with exotic fabrics, their patterns unfamiliar to Athenian eyes, or jars of perfumed oil from far ports. Such goods were admired, bargained for, but sometimes also distrusted, as Athenians prided themselves on self-sufficiency. The Agora thus became a place of encounter, where local identity rubbed against the influence of the wider Mediterranean world. Entertainers also appeared, bringing moments of diversion. Jugglers, flute players, or storytellers might draw small crowds. Their performances were not grand, as in the theater, but intimate and spontaneous. Picture a young boy laughing as a juggler tosses clay balls into the air, or a group of bystanders tapping their feet to the rhythm of a flute. Though often viewed with a hint of suspicion, entertainers lived on the fringes, relying on gifts or coins tossed their way. They nonetheless brought texture to the Agora, small sparks of amusement amid the more serious currents of politics and trade. Philosophers and sophists, too, though more respected than jugglers, could at times seem marginal. Their debates and lectures unfolded in the open air, free to anyone who wished to listen. Some Athenians admired them deeply. Others rolled their eyes at their endless questions. The Agora gave them a platform, but not always secure footing. Their role illustrates how porous the boundary could be between central and peripheral, between honored teacher and idle chatterer. On the darker edge of Agora life were those who exploited its openness. Pickpockets and petty thieves undoubtedly moved among the crowds, seeking opportunity in the distraction of debate or the bustle of trade. Public slaves, serving as a form of police, patrolled the space to maintain order. Their presence was a reminder that the Agora's openness came with risks, and that the freedom to mingle could easily blur into disorder. At the very margins were figures tied to trade that skirted propriety. Courtesans, or hetera, were sometimes glimpsed in the Agora, though their lives were shaped more by private gatherings than public ones. Unlike most women, they could appear more openly, engaging men in conversation, displaying wit, and cultivating relationships. While often excluded from citizen respectability, some achieved influence through connections with powerful patrons. Their presence in or near the Agora was both tolerated and judged, a reminder of how social boundaries bent at the edges. We should not imagine the Agora only as a dignified stage. It was also noisy, messy, and sometimes unruly. Animals were herded through, vendors shouted, children played, jugglers distracted, and pickpockets lurked. It was, in short, alive, an embodiment of the city itself, with all its contradictions. The grandeur of public benefactors and the humbleness of herb sellers existed alongside the chatter of philosophers and the antics of entertainers. Together, these contrasts gave the Agora its rhythm, its particular hum of energy. For the outsider, whether a foreign trader, a wandering performer, or a marginal figure, the Agora was both opportunity and exposure. Here they could find customers, patrons, or at least an audience. Yet here, too, they faced judgment, exclusion, or ridicule. The Agora magnified both inclusion and exclusion, providing visibility but never security. Archaeological finds again whisper of these less formal lives. Terracotta figurines of performers, graffiti scratched on stones, inscriptions mocking rivals. These traces remind us that the Agora was not a solemn marble stage, but a lived space where play, risk, and performance unfolded beside law, trade, and politics. To close our long stroll through the Agora, let's imagine standing at the edge of the square as dusk begins to fall. The merchants pack away their wares, sweeping dust from their mats. Statesmen finish their last conversations, heading home to private dinners. A juggler gathers his balls, slipping them into a pouch. A child tugs at her mother's hand, tired from the festival procession. The marble colonnades grow quiet as shadows lengthen, and the hum of the city shifts to other places. What remains is the sense of a shared space, layered with lives both central and marginal, both powerful and humble. And so the Agora, when we take in all its inhabitants, the wealthy, the modest, the women, the children, the foreigners, the slaves, the entertainers, and even the thieves, reveals itself not as a single story, but as a tapestry. Each thread, however faint, is part of the whole. Each presence, however overlooked, shaped the rhythm of Athens. It is in this diversity and in this contrast that the Agora continues to speak, not with the clamor of its old voices, but with the quiet persistence of history waiting in stone. And so, as we leave behind the stones and colonnades of the Athenian Agora, let the clamor of the day fade into the distance. We have walked through its market stalls and shaded porticos, lingered with merchants and philosophers, glimpsed the wealthy with their attendants, the humble with their baskets, the children with their laughter, and even the wandering entertainers with their songs and tricks. Each of them, in their way, has left a mark on this space that once lay at the very heart of Athens. The Agora was not just a marketplace. It was a reflection of the city itself, with all its variety, contradictions, and rhythms. Here politics and trade intertwined, religion and family life overlapped, strangers and citizens met in cautious exchange. Its stones bore the footprints of the powerful and the powerless alike, and even now, centuries later, they continue to whisper traces of those countless lives. As you rest, perhaps you can imagine standing at the edge of the square one final time. The sun has set, the air is soft and cool. Torches flicker faintly along the colonnades, casting gentle light on marble columns worn by time. The voices of the day are gone, replaced by silence, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves or the distant bark of a dog. You are alone in the Agora, but not lonely. Instead, there's a feeling of quiet connection, as if the many lives that pass through here still linger faintly in the air, resting now, as you prepare to rest as well. Compared with our modern comforts, the safety of closed doors, the glow of electric light, the ease of food waiting in kitchens, the world of the Agora was harsh, uncertain, and fragile. Yet it carried its own rhythm, one that endures in the stones left behind. To think of it is to feel both distance and closeness. Distance in time, but closeness in the simple patterns of human life, buying and selling, walking and talking, seeking and hoping. So let this story fade slowly, like torchlight dwindling into night. Let the dust of the Agora settle. Let the hum of voices quiet into memory. Here, in the stillness, you can rest. The Athenians have gone home. The stalls are empty. The debates have ended. What remains is only calm, a stillness stretching across centuries, inviting you to drift into your own night's rest. Thank you for listening and for allowing me, the sleepy historian, to walk beside you tonight through these ancient stones. If this quiet storytelling has brought you comfort, you're always welcome to return. Until then, let the silence of the Agora become your silence. Let history become a lullaby, and may your sleep be deep and untroubled. Good night.